And that's all of our wrap up. And so Todd and Patrick, if you want to come back on and we can answer any other questions, if anyone has time remaining. And we appreciate, Patrick, you staying on for this as well.
Absolutely. It's like the after show bonus, right, that we have going on. So.
Yeah.
All right, sure.
Awesome. Thank you for everybody who can't leave or they're leaving because they have out of time. I appreciate your time. For those that can stick around, we can stick around for a couple more questions, and I think that it will be a great conversation. So, Patrick, so the next question we have up here is, this is the great presentation. So congratulations, Patrick, on that. Can immobile populations be relocated? I wish I could have a follow-up question on this. When you mean immobile, are they talking about those that physically can't move? How can climate change impact the communication or the community and be communicated to immobile and trapped populations?
I'm not precisely sure how to answer that. I would say that, say, like, people who are in hospitals, or like, say, like, elderly facilities or whatever. I mean, I think, I don't know, I would be maybe communicate to those sort of facilities. I think, again, you kind of want to work with, say, just use hospitals as an example. For the hospitals, for their siting of facilities, I actually know of a couple right now that are doing a lot of this sort of like resilience work. I mean, a lot of Canadian hospitals are like mandated to do this sort of thing, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think probably working with, a lot of the owners of these facilities to talk, okay, well, make them aware of their risks, and, potentially by, I don't know, by working with civic planners and such. But that's a really interesting question. And again, it kind of illustrates the complexity of this, because it's not just homes. Right. It's not just, it's going to be businesses. It's going to be a lot of things, the infrastructure of lives that's going to, be affected. So that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed I couldn't ask the follow-up question on that, because I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. But if you're listening still, please jump on and kind of clarify that, because I'd like to kind of unpack that one. Andrea asks, are you finding SDG framework useful, being used to align priorities in considering multiple dimensions of climate adaptation, migration, risk assessment, evaluation, and decision making? Wow, that's packing a lot into that one. For example, you mentioned insurers' perspective, investments in growth, and KPIs. Yeah, that's a
good question. I'll say that. So first of all, the SDGs, and thank you for asking that. So the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, so that's a UN thing. I think there's 17 of them right now. And so the answer for that, how I personally found it useful. So one of the things that we're doing at Stantec, I'll give a plug for my new employer. Stantec actually has created sort of like starting to create a climate practice of its own, like different people working in different aspects of climate risk, physical risk, science, sustainability, and such. The SDGs generally fall under sustainability efforts. And one of the things that we're working on, and I've seen other organizations are working on this as well, is how do you connect this? Because historically, sustainability has been its own silo, kind of away from adaptation, which is away from hazard mitigation. And all these silos, in my personal belief and conviction, is that in the next 5 or 10 years, by necessity, they're going to start breaking down. Hazard mitigation is not going to mean much without being adapted to climate. Sustainability, climate adaptation doesn't mean much if it's putting out, more emissions that are going to make things worse. You're not going to be, disaster planning is going to be absolutely necessary. You can't have, a field of solar panels, that are just going to be vulnerable to the next, hailstorm. And so you got to think about that. So all of it's going to start intersecting. But the SDGs are a really interesting framework. And I can tell you, at least from the 3 weeks I've been on the job so far, and from what I've seen other places, people are starting to think about that. So thank you for mentioning those.
So Chris Godley asked, he goes, I may have missed it. He goes, what is Patrick's opinion on some of the media coverage on this topic? And he's thinking specifically the 2020 New York Times Magazine article, which you put in the chat, What do you think of the news coverage?
That's a huge question. So first of all, the article he said, that was where I pulled one of my illustrations from. It was a co-effort with the New York Times and ProPublica, and in one of my ASAP webinars, we actually had one of the authors, Abraham Lustgarten, I think he spoke with us a bit. So I thought it was great. I think it's a really good, and I think frankly, it was braver than most, because a lot of times people are really reluctant to speculate too much. And so they kind of stop short about a lot of the stuff. That article in the New York Times really did not. They kind of went for it. That's where I got a lot of things about some of the indications that Russia, of all places, is getting climate migrants, or migrants to it and such. So I think it's great. I think in general, the coverage, it's a bit sensational. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen stories about Newtok, Alaska. And I think, and by the way, I mentioned them, there's a great film about it, but there's a whole lot more going on there. And the poor people in Newtok, Alaska are getting a little tired of it. I've actually heard this. They're getting a little tired of being the subject of everything. So it's like, and it also doesn't really get the real, it seems to be like, oh, here's something falling to the ocean, but it doesn't really touch on the real kind of much deeper structural and systemic threats there. I mean, it doesn't touch on at all about insurance. And it's all really disconnected. For instance, you want to hear on Bloomberg, in Bloomberg's the financial part of it about the insurance stuff, but nobody really draws a line to say, okay, well, here's flooded communities. It's like, we're not doing it. So the journalism is getting better. Christopher Flavell at the New York Times is excellent. There's a lot of really great, Mario Ariza, who you're going to have on later. He's excellent, absolutely excellent. Definitely tune in for that. But it's tough. And, again, one of the things I'm doing in the Climate Migration Network is trying to help, we're trying to help think about ways to influence the narrative of this building, because, in the popular imagination, things get filtered down. So as of right now, anyone's heard of managed retreat kind of has, these ideas of houses or whatever, and then, which is great as it is, but again, it's not really deep. So overall, it could be better. It's not terrible, but it could be better. That's my opinion on the media coverage.
All right, so I'm going to ask like a really off the wall question here, and it just got me thinking about this.
Okay.
So there are scientists, there are researchers, in archaeologists that believe that through texts and through reading ancient scrolls that Atlantis was a real place, right? That it was some grand city that existed, and they're not really sure like why it disappeared. Whether it's, and I'm not saying that it is, I'm just saying this is like some of the stuff that I'm reading. Could Atlantis actually been a city that was impacted by climate change back then? I mean, if it existed, I don't know if it did or not. I'm not saying it did. I'm not a conspiracy. I'm just saying, like, it's something like that. I mean, is that something that could possibly have been a thing?
Well, that is an unexpected question. I will say that Atlantis itself, I actually do have an opinion on this.
Okay.
So there's a lot of people who say that Atlantis was based on, I think, Santorini, which is an island in the Aegean Sea.
Yeah.
And it's things like that. So yeah, I'd say Atlantis as a giant continent in the Atlantic Ocean, probably not.
No.
But as Santorini or something like that, yeah, why not? And here's the thing. So I think it was interesting you mentioned text, because I think human oral tradition is actually there's a lot of study on this, because again, there's the bias against, there's been historically in sort of Western science, there's been a bit of a bias against like indigenous peoples and their ideas. And we've dismissed them as fairy tales or whatever. And so we don't really listen. But as time goes on, there's been a lot of discovery that there's a lot of accuracy in that. A lot of the story, human oral stories, they actually they communicate them pretty well through time, down from Homer in the Greek epics to stories of that keep evidence of giant earthquakes and such. They're actually very reliable, and humans do a good job of it. And so I think absolutely 100% it could be based on something real. And I'm going to put something in the chat myself, because I'm not going to make you look up this book. This is a book by an Australian author called The Edge of Memory. And he was looking discussing exactly this, how oral tradition really holds. So two examples, one, the Noah's flood, for instance, which has cognates through all cultures all over the world. The idea of it that potentially when the Baltic Sea sort of filled in, as the Mediterranean filled in, when the waters started rising near the end of the last ice age, that you could have seen, if you were living on the shores of the Baltic, you could have seen water moving by like feet in a day, like
Right.
very, very fast. And so these sort of things are moving like really far inland. So but this person was looking at a lot of Aboriginal stories in Australia and a lot of the geography around, all over the continent, and really shows that the Aboriginal stories tell an awful lot about history. Like really, they do. So these stories, yeah, you're exactly right. And there's another field called traditional ecological knowledge. And that's something that anthropologists use to do this, to say like, here's how, the Inuit, they have the stories and something like that to tell you exactly when something's going to happen, when the scientists don't really know. So it's a really important thing, and it's a really important thing to figure out how we are going to live on this planet in a different way. I think it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back on the scientific side of it and the archaeological side of it, that there are parts of Alexandria that are currently from ancient Alexandria that are under the water in the current Bay of Alexandria, and so things shifted, right? So it's a possibility.
And on the other side, like in Rome, the port of Ostia, which is like 30-40 miles north of Rome, is a historic port, in Roman times. And now it's like several miles inland because the silt from all the deforestation just like came to the river, and then suddenly 2,000 years later, it's like, but it's way far inland. But again, you're right, things change. Things
and that is why I think it's critical when we take a look at climate change, that as emergency managers, we have to be thinking kind of that way of changing things. So this is very important and very timely. Molly asks, how do you see planning for climate migration refugees integrated into government program areas? Are you aware of an example of how cities such as Ann Arbor, which you talked about, are doing this work?
Programs specifically, not yet. I do know, well, first of all, for climate refugees specifically, not yet. I do know that New York State, and I don't think I'm telling anyone a secret, you could look it up if you want, NYSERDA, and I forget what the acronym stands for. It's a state agency in New York, was actually one of the major agencies funding some of ASAP's work. So they are looking, wanting to really get an analysis. The state of Michigan is looking at this as well. I know that you'll keep hearing the cities of Duluth and Buffalo being mentioned. I'm pretty sure they're paying someone for it. I don't know, but they keep getting mentioned. They're trying to think about this. But in general, you can learn. So actually, one thing I'll mention, the National League of Cities has a report. It's co-authored by two people. I actually run my committees at various times with ASAP, Kelly Ladani Main and Anna Morandi. And basically it's a report talking about exactly this, like how can cities do this? And National League of Cities is like the premier US organization of city governments. So I would definitely tell people to kind of take a look at this a bit. And going beyond climate, a lot of cities have sort of welcoming programs and such. Some of them seem pretty generic, but other ones, like I know Chicago, one of the, I don't want to editorialize. One of the things that Rahm Emanuel did, for whatever, how we want to say that, this was a good thing, is that he had this program that was kind of giving a leg up to immigrants who were trying to get their credentials updated for the United States. And so basically, the idea, the stereotype of, say, here's an engineer who has to drive a cab, and so that's a ridiculous waste of an engineer. Let's give them assistance to help integrate them, and they will help generate money and taxes for our community. And so there's actually some city support for that. So things like that, there's a lot of interesting welcoming city programs you can look at. There's good stuff out there for that.
That is actually outstanding. I actually met a doctor from the Philippines who had to change careers completely because he couldn't get credentialed over here in the United States. So that's a good thing. Jessica Sims says, thank you so much, Patrick, for enlightening and education, but horrible, terrible, devastatingly depressing. How do you, as a human being with a family and people from who you love and love you, stay hopeful about these catastrophic projections? Jessica, that's yes. I think
that's a big question. So Jessica, I'll try to make this short. I'll completely honest. I've been aware of this stuff for a while, way back in the mists of time in the early 2000s and stuff, and I started seeing stuff. I actually went through a bit of a emotional crisis probably 6, 7 years ago, and it wasn't great. And I think sometimes people need that, the increase in the idea of sort of like that existential despair that comes from this. People increasingly recognize this. Psychologists are looking into this. I dealt with it basically, the fact that I have a family, and you got to be hopeful for them. You got to take care of them. But then the other thing is, again, looking historically, there's a lot, that whole doomer thing that I was talking about. I think that's a cop out. I think it really is, because it does not look at, say, human history. Even if every bit of civilization crumbled to the ground tomorrow, I think if people being who they are, even if we were just going back to living in the woods or whatever like that, human beings are incredibly resourceful and adaptable creatures. We do well. We've done well. We've lived in so many different ways in human history. It's almost vanity to imagine that, this is the only thing we can possibly do. I think people are going to be okay. I really do. People as an aggregate, in terms of this society, yeah, there's things that are wrong with it, but there's good things too. And that makes me want to try to preserve the good things. It honestly is. I mean, I like driving cars. I don't know if I'll be able to in the future, but I like it. I like road trip. I like all these things. But, I think we can do that. And we also have a perspective. Civilizations have problems. They all do. But human beings kept going. I mentioned the Western Roman Empire. It fell pretty badly, but you know what? Everybody around it kept going, and even it developed into other things too. So human beings, I have a lot of hope for humans, as a group, and even as individuals, we're pretty good. That Rebecca Solnit book, talks about it. Again, everything may not be hunky-dory forever, but we have something special. So, and then beyond that, I don't want to get too deep into these things, but having a sense of spirituality, even faith, the philosophy, things like that, those existential things, I'd recommend that. Everyone's got to make their own views of these things in life, but having that perspective that what you see in front of you is not the only thing that matters, I think is really helpful. So
Richard says you're an optimist with a big capitalized shouting R, an optimist. But so am I, and he wants to know how we can help. And then Chris Godley kind of puts this into perspective as well. And it says, part of our job as emergency managers is to be a source of hope. And we can define the challenges and bring together the communities to develop effective solutions. Chris, that was a beautiful way of putting it. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Richard, for Richard, I'll have Patrick reach out to you on how he can help. And then so there's one other question here that I want to get to, and we'll end it with this. Or there's two. One's a statement more, and I'll read this really quick. Do you know if there are any lessons learned being compiled on the two U.S. city climate-induced relocations network? I said it wrong. Newtalk and the Isle de Jean
Jean Charles.
Jean Charles. Gosh, my grandmother would be so mad at me for not being able to say that properly. Parlez-vous français? Comment allez-vous? Right. So that's a question on that. Are there any lessons learned on that you could share?
That's a great question. There's a lot. I would say go to Dr. Google sometimes. There's some academics who are thinking about this. There's a network, and again, it's like a really old-fashioned one, like a listserv, and you have to ask to be a part of it and whatever. But it's sponsored, I think, through somewhere at the University of Colorado in Boulder Atmospheric Research Center. It's called Rising Voices, about like indigenous scholars and such. There's a lot in climate change. And so it's a little old fashioned, but you can probably look at some of the people who are managing it, at least from a couple of years ago. I know it was like somebody from like UC Santa Barbara or whatever. And, they're doing a lot of thinking about this. There's been some publications, but really, there's no like official government reports yet. I do know that Ile de Jean Charles was the major source of funding was from HUD in that case. I don't know who does Newtalk, but I do know there's a couple of Alaska Native organizations that are looking at this as well. That Newtalk's also getting federal funding. HUD and the Corps of Engineers actually seem to be most active in some of these things. So there's not like an after action report yet, but again, just take a look. do some digging about that. There's a lot of there's some bad information, like the pop articles I kind of avoid, but there's great stuff. And again, if you have time, watch that Patagonia movie. It's really powerful. I think it's a new talk. It's a really good one.
Last question. And I know you're tired and you've been traveling, and we've 23 minutes over what we said we're going to keep. Do you have any thoughts? This is from Jim. Do you have any thoughts on how we can change this? Is a loaded question, Jim. Any social trust within the U.S. with the current state of polarization? I don't think that. Oh, that's an impossible question to answer. I'm putting that on Patrick. That's tough.
I don't think it's an impossible question, because I'll tell you, it's really quick. I have a couple minutes because yes, I'm exhausted. I need to get home and stuff like that. But anyway, I think that's the necessary question of our time. I think I really truly think so. And I think, again, when I mentioned the links between this climate change, how we're going to get through this as people, as communities, as countries, whatever it's going to be, by depending on each other. So we need to figure out ways to do that. There are academics who do this. Robert Putnam, the guy who wrote Bowling Alone in 2000. Yeah. I read it only recently. I feel bad it took so long to get to it, but it's excellent. Those who are thinkers really think deeply about this, like things like, we talk about bowling leagues and churches and all these things like that. These are necessary things to bring us together, to kind of, like laboratories of democracy, laboratories of living together. So being willing to get off our screens and see each other, I think, it's harder with COVID, but now as COVID's easing up a little bit, fingers crossed, we're going to, I think, do that, find a way to get into, join groups, learn to work with each other. To me, that fostering trust, I think that's one of the best ways to do that. And I think the other way, again, it's like, I don't know. Just try to try to think best of each other. Because I think there's a saying from a long time ago. I don't know who said this, but it was something like, be kind to everyone you meet, because everyone is fighting a great battle, whatever it is. And I think maybe that's simple, just being kind and being nice. So, it's kind of advice you hear from your mom, but it's good advice. And then that's how you build trust, when people aren't being jerks to each other all the time. So, yeah,
I agree with that 100%, Patrick. Be empathetic and understand, and be graceful to everybody. Patrick, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for having me. And again, if anyone wants to reach out, look me up on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'll be happy to continue the conversation. Now I'm going to go get home and fall asleep. So thank you.
Sleep well, son. Sleep well, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you all for joining us today. And this was a Leaders Speak webinar produced by the Emergency Management Network, the trusted voice in emergency management, in conjunction with Speak and Spark. Connect to the experts that inform, engage, and inspire. Sponsored by the Natural Disaster and Emergency Management Expo, where everyone belongs. Disaster Tech. Save lives, protect the environment, and build resilient communities with purpose-built, decision-supported technologies for practitioners and researchers in disaster risk management. Join us on August 18th when Samantha Montano discusses the intersection of disaster and climate change. Sign up today at www.speakandspark.com/webinars.